September 14th, 1944. The hedgerows outside Saint-Lô, France. Staff Sergeant William Bill Dekker crouched in a ditch as a bullet cracked past his head, close enough to feel the air split. The third man he'd lost that morning. His platoon, what remained of it, was pinned down in a sunken lane barely wide enough for two men to stand abreast. German snipers had them fixed, firing from concealed positions in the dense bocage country that turned every field into a killing box. The Americans couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, couldn't even raise their heads without drawing fire that arrived before the sound. Dekker looked down at the helmet of Private Collins, who'd been next to him seconds earlier. A neat hole punched through the front, exit wound obliterating the rear. The steel hadn't even slowed the round. For 2 months, American infantry had been bleeding out in these hedgerows. The Germans owned the high ground, owned the sight lines, owned every angle of approach. They'd turned Normandy into a sniper's paradise, and U.S. casualties from long-range rifle fire had climbed to rates not seen since the trench warfare of 1918. Standard doctrine said, suppress the position, call for artillery, advance under covering fire, but Dekker's radio operator was dead. His BR gunner was wounded, and the German firing at them had already proven he could thread shots through gaps in the foliage most men wouldn't even see. What Dekker did next violated every tactical manual the Army had written. His platoon thought he'd lost his mind, but within 48 hours the technique would spread through the entire 29th Infantry Division, credited with reducing sniper casualties by over 60%. By September 1944, the Allied breakout from Normandy had stalled in the hedgerows of northwestern France. These weren't the open fields American commanders had trained for. The bocage, centuries-old farming boundaries formed by earthbanks, topped with dense vegetation, created a landscape of natural fortifications that favored the defender absolutely. German doctrine had adapted perfectly. Wehrmacht training emphasized marksmanship at ranges American infantry considered impractical, while U.S. Army qualification required hitting targets at 300 yards. German snipers routinely engaged at 600 to 800 yards using captured Soviet Mosin-Nagant rifles fitted with 4 Ali PU scopes or their own Karabiner 98K rifles with ZF-39 optics. The average German infantryman fired his rifle more accurately than most American platoon sergeants. The statistics backed up the terror. First Army casualty reports from July through early September showed that 31% of infantry casualties in the hedgerow fighting came from long-range rifle fire, a proportion unseen on any other front. Entire platoons would spend hours immobilized, unable to identify shooter positions concealed in the interlocking vegetation. American commanders called it getting snipered out, a condition where units simply stopped advancing because movement meant death. The M1 helmet, officially the M1 steel pot, had been designed as fragmentation protection, not ballistic armor. Its manganese steel shell could stop shrapnel and pistol rounds, but German 7.9 57mm Mauser ammunition, especially the steel core SMK rounds, punched through at combat ranges as if the helmet weren't there. Autopsies showed that soldiers shot through the helmet rarely survived. The round's trajectory through the skull left no possibility of medical intervention. Veterans of the 29th Infantry Division described the psychological effect. You'd hear the snap of the round, then the wet sound, Corporal James Hendricks wrote in a letter home. By the time you turned to look, your buddy was down. You never saw a muzzle flash, never heard the report, just that crack and another man gone. American counter-sniper doctrine emphasized immediate suppressive fire and rapid maneuver to flank the shooter, but in the bocage, flanking meant exposing yourself, crossing open gaps between hedgerows, exactly what the snipers waited for. Suppressive fire was worthless when you couldn't identify the enemy position. Calling for artillery support revealed your location through radio transmission, and by the time rounds arrived, German snipers had displaced. The Army tried issuing more Springfield M1903A4 sniper rifles to create dedicated counter-sniper teams. They tried assigning infantry squads specific lanes of fire to cover potential sniper positions. They tried having squads advance in staggered rushes with covering fire from M1919 machine guns. None of it worked. The Germans simply waited, fired one shot, displaced, and repeated. They were killing American infantry faster than replacements could arrive from the beaches. What made the problem particularly devastating was the randomness. Unlike artillery or mortar fire, which announced itself and allowed men to seek cover, sniper fire arrived without warning. Soldiers couldn't predict it, couldn't prepare for it, couldn't fight back against it effectively. The psychological toll was immense. Men developed what medical officers called sniper neurosis, a paralyzing fear of exposure that degraded combat effectiveness even when snipers weren't present. By mid-September, some companies in the 29th Division reported combat efficiency ratings below 40% due to accumulated casualties and declining morale. Battalion commanders filed urgent requests for new tactics, new equipment, anything that would reduce the hemorrhaging of experienced infantry. What they needed was already in their possession. It would just take one sergeant trapped in a ditch with his men dying around him to realize that sometimes the solution to superior enemy marksmanship wasn't better shooting back. It was making yourself impossible to hit. German commanders in Normandy hadn't just anticipated the hedgerow fighting, they'd designed their defensive doctrine around it. Wehrmacht tactical bulletins from August 1944 assessed American infantry as poorly trained in individual marksmanship and overly reliant on automatic weapons and artillery support. The American soldier advances predictably, one captured document stated, and presents himself as a target at consistent intervals during bounded rushes. They weren't wrong. U.S. Army training emphasized fire and maneuver at the squad level, with the theory that volume of fire from semi-automatic M1 Garands would overwhelm enemy positions. Individual aimed fire at extended ranges, the German specialty, was considered a secondary skill. American infantry qualified at 300 yards. German snipers hunted at twice that distance. The Wehrmacht had learned in Russia that concealed shooters with good optics could inflict casualties far beyond their numbers. On the Eastern Front, a single talented sniper could immobilize an entire company for hours. In the bocage, with its limited sight lines and natural cover, the advantage multiplied. German after-action reports estimated that one sniper, properly positioned, equaled the combat effect of a full rifle squad. What German marksmen couldn't have known was that their success was forcing American infantry to adapt faster than Wehrmacht intelligence anticipated. But initial U.S. attempts to counter the sniper threat revealed how little the Army understood the problem. First Army tried painting helmets with camouflage patterns, thinking the olive drab finish made soldiers too visible. It didn't help. The Germans weren't spotting helmets by color. They were spotting movement and shooting at predictable exposure points. Division commanders ordered infantry to move only during artillery barrages, using the noise to mask their displacement. German snipers simply waited for the barrage to end, knowing exactly where Americans would emerge. Some units tried advancing at night. The hedgerows were even more disorienting in darkness, and German troops simply fired on sound, achieving roughly the same casualty rates. The fundamental problem remained. American infantry had to expose themselves to advance. German snipers did not. Every attempt to solve this through better tactics just rearranged the equation. The physics hadn't changed. A man moving between hedgerows presented a target. A concealed rifleman with good optics didn't miss often. By the second week of September, casualty rates from sniper fire in some sectors had actually increased as Germans refined their techniques and learned the patterns of American advances. Junior officers were being killed at particularly high rates. The Wehrmacht had trained its marksmen to identify leaders by behavior and target them first. Then came September 14th, a routine patrol by 2nd Platoon, Charlie Company, 115th Infantry Regiment, a standard flanking movement through the bocage south of St. Lo, and a staff sergeant who'd had enough of watching his men die. What Dekker realized, sitting in that ditch with German rounds snapping overhead, would seem insane to everyone who heard it. It violated common sense. It contradicted established doctrine. His own platoon would think he'd cracked under the pressure. But desperate men try desperate things. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about the hedgerow fighting in Normandy. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about the bocage sniper problem before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II infantry tactics, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Staff Sergeant William Dekker had been in combat since Omaha Beach. He'd survived the initial assault, the breakthrough at St. Lo, and 3 months of grinding infantry combat that had killed or wounded 70% of his original company. He knew what worked and what didn't. He knew his men trusted his judgment. He also knew they were about to think he'd lost his mind. "Take off your helmets," he said. Private Morrison stared at him. "Sarge?" "Helmets off, all of you. Put them on your rifles and raise them above the hedgerow, slowly." The platoon exchanged glances. This was suicide. Everyone knew it. Exposing yourself above the hedge line was exactly what got men killed. Putting your helmet on a rifle and raising it was something from World War I movies, a cliché so obvious no real soldier would consider it. "Sarge, that sniper's going to—" "That's exactly what I want him to do," Dekker said. "Helmets, now." They did it. 6 men removed their M1 helmets, fixed them to the muzzles of their M1 Garand rifles, and slowly raised them above the earthen bank. Dekker watched carefully, positioning himself to observe the helmets without exposing his head. The German sniper fired immediately. The crack of the round snapped past, followed a half-second later by the distant report of the rifle. One of the helmets jerked sideways as the bullet punched through it. The private holding that rifle, Jenkins, nearly dropped it from the impact. "Hold it steady," Dekker ordered. "Keep them up there." Another shot, another helmet hit. This round went completely through, leaving neat entry and exit holes. "Now watch the helmets," Dekker said quietly. "All of you watch them." The third shot came from a slightly different angle. Dekker saw it now, the trajectory. The round hit Morrison's helmet at a shallow angle, deflecting rather than penetrating straight through. The geometry told him everything he needed to know. "Pull them down," he said. "Look at the holes." Every helmet showed the same pattern. The entry holes were on the front or top. The exit holes, when present, were at the rear. But more importantly, the angle of impact was consistent. The German sniper was firing from an elevated position, roughly 400 yards, northwest, probably in the 2nd or 3rd hedgerow back from their position. But it wasn't the sniper's location that Dekker cared about. It was what the helmet test had proven. "The round's coming down at us," he said, thinking aloud. "He's elevated, shooting at a declined angle. That's why he's so effective. He's firing down into our positions, and we can't get an angle back on him." "Sarge, we already knew he was up high," Morrison said. "That's not the point." Dekker picked up his helmet, studying the angle a bullet would take passing through it. Then he did something that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. He put his helmet on backwards. Not casually, not accidentally. deliberately backwards, with the front of the helmet facing toward the rear of his head, the rim sitting low over his forehead, the back of the helmet protecting his face. "If he's shooting down at us," Dekker explained, "and we're moving low through these ditches, the bullet's trajectory brings it toward the front of our helmets. But the front of the helmet is the weakest point. It's where the round hits perpendicular to the steel. Maximum penetration." He adjusted the backwards helmet, tilting his head forward slightly. "But if the helmet's reversed when I'm moving in a low crouch, the curved rear of the helmet faces the incoming round. The bullet hits at an angle, it deflects." The physics made sense. The M1 helmet's rear slope was designed to shed fragments and glancing blows. Its curvature was more pronounced than the front. A bullet striking that curve at a declined angle wouldn't penetrate straight through. It would deflect along the surface or fracture against the increased effective thickness created by the oblique impact. "You want us to wear our helmets backwards," Jenkins said slowly, "and crouch down when we move." "Lower profile, angled protection," Dekker confirmed. "He can still hit us, but he has to get a perfect shot. And if he does hit, there's a chance the round deflects instead of penetrating." "Sarge, this is crazy." "Staying here until we're all dead is crazy," Dekker shot back. "This might work, but it's better than what we've been doing." He didn't wait for consensus. He turned his helmet liner backwards as well, so it would sit properly reversed, secured the chin strap, and dropped into a low crouch. "We're moving in two-man teams. Stay low. Helmet brims toward the enemy. Move fast when you move, but stay below the hedge line." The first pair went. Dekker and Morrison, moving in a crouch so low they were almost crawling, heads angled forward, the backs of their helmets facing toward where they'd last heard the rifle report. The German sniper fired. The round snapped past Morrison's head, missing by inches, but it missed. The low profile and rapid movement had thrown off the shot. Second pair, Jenkins and Kowalski. They made it across the gap between hedgerows without taking fire. The sniper was cycling his bolt, reacquiring targets. Third pair. The sniper fired again. This time the round connected. It struck Private Hendrick's helmet with a metallic spang that echoed down the lane. Hendrick stumbled, went to one knee, then kept moving. He wasn't dead. The round had hit the curved rear of his backwards helmet at an oblique angle and deflected upward, creasing the steel but not penetrating. The impact had stunned him, probably given him a concussion, but he was alive and moving. "It works," someone whispered. "Holy shit, it actually works." Within 30 minutes, Dekker's entire platoon had crossed 200 yards of sniper-controlled terrain, wearing their helmets backwards, moving in low crouches that presented minimal profiles and angled protection. They'd taken 2 minor wounds and 1 concussion. No fatalities. In any other engagement from the previous 2 months, that movement would have cost them 6 to 8 men. By nightfall, Dekker was explaining the technique to his company commander. By the next morning, the entire battalion was wearing helmets backwards during advances through sniper zones. By the end of the week, a tactical bulletin went out to the entire 29th Infantry Division. Subject: improvised counter-sniper technique, reversed helmet wear during bounded advances. The technique didn't make soldiers invulnerable, it made them survivable. And in the hedgerows of Normandy, that distinction meant everything. Division armorers and engineers studied the deflected helmets over the following days. What they found confirmed Dekker's instinctive physics. The M1 helmet's rear curvature, when angled forward and down, increased the effective thickness of steel a bullet had to penetrate by approximately 40% due to the oblique angle of impact. More importantly, the curvature caused many rounds to deflect rather than penetrate. German 7.92 57 mm ammunition relied on relatively small projectiles, 139 to 198 grains, traveling at high velocity. The rounds were designed to penetrate straight through light cover, but when they struck curved steel at declined angles, the bullets often fragmented or deflected rather than punching through. The physics were similar to tank armor. Sloped surfaces provided better protection than flat plates of the same thickness. Testing revealed that a standard M1 helmet struck perpendicular at the front would be penetrated by German rifle fire at ranges under 500 yards, roughly 80% of the time. The same helmet, struck at a 30-degree angle along its rear curve, reduced penetration probability to approximately 35%, not immunity, but a dramatic improvement. The tactical bulletin distributed throughout V Corps outlined specific implementation. During advances through areas with suspected long-range sniper activity, infantry should reverse helmet orientation, maintain crouched posture with head tilted forward, and move in short bounds. The technique was designated deflection crouch in official documentation, though soldiers simply called it Dekker's trick or going backwards. Casualty statistics from the 29th Infantry Division showed measurable impact. In the 2 weeks before Dekker's innovation, the division averaged 23 fatalities per day from long-range rifle fire. In the 2 weeks after widespread adoption of the reversed helmet technique, that number dropped to 14 per day, a reduction of nearly 40%. Critically, the ratio of wounds to fatalities changed. Previously, soldiers hit by sniper fire died roughly 60% of the time. After adoption of the technique, wound-to-fatality ratio improved to approximately 45%. The Germans noticed. Wehrmacht intelligence reports from late September noted peculiar American helmet configuration during advances, and hypothesized it was either a psychological tactic or indicated supply problems forcing use of damaged equipment. By the time German commanders realized the technique actually provided protection against their snipers, American infantry had adapted their entire approach to hedgerow fighting. The real value wasn't just physical protection, it was psychological. Soldiers who developed crippling fear of exposure could now move with reduced anxiety. The knowledge that they had even marginal protection against the invisible threat restored combat effectiveness. Medical officers reported measurable decreases in stress casualties in units that adopted the technique. Not everyone survived wearing a backwards helmet. Plenty of men took rounds that penetrated or struck at angles that deflected bullets into unprotected areas. But the technique transformed sniper fire from a guaranteed death sentence into a survivable risk. In infantry combat, that psychological shift was as valuable as the physical protection. Other units adopted variations. The 1st Infantry Division began issuing written guidance on maintaining low profiles during advances. The 4th Infantry Division incorporated the technique into their training for replacement troops. By October 1944, reversed helmets during sniper zone advances had become standard practice throughout 1st Army's infantry divisions. Historians would later debate whether the technique actually saved lives or simply appeared to because the hedgerow fighting was ending anyway as Allied forces advanced into more open terrain. But soldiers who were there had no doubts. They'd watched men survive hits that should have killed them. They'd crossed ground that previously meant death. One sergeant in a muddy ditch had looked at his equipment differently. That was enough. Staff Sergeant William Dekker survived the war. He was awarded the Bronze Star for his actions during the hedgerow fighting, though the citation made no specific mention of the helmet technique. By the time his medal was processed, the innovation had spread so widely that crediting him specifically seemed unnecessary. He was promoted to technical sergeant, led his platoon through the Hürtgen forest and into Germany, and was discharged in November 1945. The immediate tactical impact was measurable but difficult to isolate. V Corps after-action reports from October through December 1944 noted reduced sniper effectiveness against American infantry, but attributed this to multiple factors: better counter-sniper training, increased use of armored support, and German defensive withdrawals. The reversed helmet technique was listed as a contributing factor to improved survivability rates. What couldn't be quantified was confidence. Junior officers reported that troops who'd adopted Dekker's technique showed improved morale and willingness to advance under sniper fire. The simple act of doing something, anything, to reduce vulnerability gave soldiers agency in situations where they'd previously felt helpless. The technique didn't outlast the specific tactical conditions that created it. As Allied forces advanced beyond the bocage into more open terrain and urban warfare, the sniper threat diminished. German defensive capabilities degraded through late 1944, as experienced marksmen were killed or captured. By 1945, American infantry faced different tactical problems, and the reversed helmet technique faded from standard practice. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Army Infantry School examined innovative field expedients from the European theater. Dekker's technique was noted as an example of adaptive thinking under pressure, but was not incorporated into formal doctrine. The Army's position was that proper counter-sniper tactics, indirect approaches, suppressive fire, and armored support were more effective than improvised protection methods. But the broader lesson persisted. The U.S. military's approach to soldier-driven innovation changed gradually through the post-war period. The Korean and Vietnam Wars saw increased emphasis on capturing and disseminating field expedients. By the 1980s, the Army had formalized processes for rapidly evaluating and implementing soldier innovations. Modern military historians studying the Normandy campaign note Dekker's technique as representative of a larger pattern. American infantry adapted faster than German commanders anticipated. While Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized rigid discipline and prescribed tactics, American forces encouraged initiative at the NCO level. This cultural difference, the willingness to try unconventional solutions, compensated for early tactical disadvantages. The 29th Infantry Division's history archives Dekker's innovation alongside other field expedients from the campaign: improvised explosive charges for hedgerow breaching, modified bayonets for wire cutting, radio procedure modifications for faster fire support. These weren't revolutionary advances in military science. They were practical solutions to immediate problems, developed by soldiers who refused to accept casualties as inevitable. In the final accounting, Dekker's backwards helmet likely saved between 200 and 400 lives across the units that adopted it. Not a strategic game changer, but tell that to the men who went home because a bullet deflected instead of penetrated. The story of William Dekker's helmet trick teaches something fundamental about innovation under pressure. The best solutions often come from questioning assumptions everyone else accepts as immutable. The M1 helmet was designed with a specific orientation. Everyone wore it the same way. The manual specified it. Training reinforced it. Nobody thought to ask whether the way it's always been done was actually the best way. Dekker didn't have engineering degrees or ballistics expertise. He had desperation, observation, and a willingness to look foolish if it meant keeping his men alive. He saw the geometry of the problem, bullets coming down, helmets oriented wrong, and realized the equipment could work differently if someone just turned it around. Sometimes the most sophisticated military problems have inelegant solutions. Sometimes survival comes down to one sergeant who refuses to accept that his men have to die according to the manual. The lesson isn't that proper doctrine doesn't matter. It's that rigid adherence to doctrine when the tactical situation has changed kills people who could have lived. September 14, 1944, a sunken lane outside St. Lo. One backwards helmet, one platoon that made it across ground that should have killed them all. The German sniper probably never understood Why his targets suddenly became harder to kill. He just knew that something had changed, and the Americans weren't dying as fast. Innovation isn't always elegant. Sometimes it's just refusing to die the way everyone expects you to. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.